I have so many seedlings to plant, and since I neglected to make a garden plan again, I've been moving things in and out of the greenhouse, laying it all out on the beds, which I prepared earlier, and I think I have a pretty good plan that's going to work this year. Now, as gardeners, we tend to put a lot of thought into the air temperature, particularly overnight before we plant anything. But this is a soil thermometer. And at the moment, it is reading about 14 degrees Celsius. That is 56 degrees Fahrenheit. And that is pretty good for what I want to plant. This is my cutting garden. And I like to check the soil temperature before I plant anything because keeping the roots of your seedlings happy is just as important, if not more so, than that top growth when it's still fairly early in the season. Now, the reading you want to see on your thermometer is going to vary based on what you're planting. And for us, we are still a good few weeks away from our average last frost date. But everything that I have to plant in this area is fairly cold tolerant, so I'm not worried about risk of frost. I'm going to cover them anyway for at least a couple of weeks overnight because that's going to help keep that soil temperature a little bit more stable. And while these seedlings can easily handle a mild frost, the colder they get, the more it's going to slow down their growth, and I don't want that to happen. So this is my cutting garden. My vegetable garden is over there, and it's still a little bit cool to plant most of what I have in there. There's a whole bunch of stuff direct seeded already, but not a whole lot to look at yet. So we're working in the cutting garden today, and everything I have here is basically cool flowers. And what I was hoping to see was in the range of 12 to 15 degrees Celsius, which is 52 to 60 degrees Fahrenheit, and we are right in there. So I'm super happy to see that. I'm gonna look for above 15 or 60 degrees Fahrenheit before I plant the vegetable garden. So this is my tiny greenhouse and my cutting garden. I started building it in 2020, first with the greenhouse when I had to shut down my piano studio for reasons that we are all familiar with. And while I am back to teaching full-time, I have continued to grow and expand this space. We are Zone 6, Eastern Canada. We get a very cold, long winter, but growth has picked up. I've been pulling tulips for a good couple of days now. I can't wait for these lilac lavender ones to bloom, and hopefully the ranunculus won't be too far behind. So I have a long week ahead of me shoveling all of this new soil that we had delivered. But basically my cutting garden consists of this and those other 4, so 5 raised beds in total. This little greenhouse built of old recycled windows. And this is mostly for seed starting, hardening off seedlings, and a lovely spot for an afternoon coffee break. We have 7 in-ground rows on this side, and we are still working to expand back this way. We have 10 to 12 feet more to go. It's a little bit of a mess, but it's coming. And then we have 8 smaller raised beds over on this side. So now that the soil temperature is finally where I want it, I can start planting this cutting garden, and we're going to start with Status. So I have 2 trays here that have 32 plants each and a few smaller cells over there. And my goal for this space is to be all annual so that I can tarp it in the winter to prevent weed growth. It wasn't what I did last year. There's some yarrow over there that needs to move, and this bed is full of Rebeckia, but after this blooms, I'm going to move that. Same with the yarrow, because that needs some serious weeding. But the first row is already filled with stalk interplanted with snapdragons, and this one is going to be Status. So now we get to see what the roots look like. Oh, hello. That is a beautiful root system. They've started to circle a tiny little bit, not too much, definitely not root bound, but ready to be planted. And that says Seeker Pastel Blue. Now these are just a cute little rosette at the moment, but when they start to flower, those stalks are going to go straight up, and this will put on quite a show. So that was pastel blue. This one is just blue. Now I'm thinking this might not go all the way back. Now we're still torn actually between expanding these rows all the way back to where we know the property line now is, or just adding a few extra feet and then putting a really nice perennial garden and seating area back there. Because of those trees up there, we do actually get a little bit of nice afternoon shade, which we don't really have in any other parts of this yard. So that is something that I am considering. I definitely have enough work spaces in this yard, and I think I'm about maxed out in what I can take care of on my own. So let me know what you think, but I'm almost entirely convinced that that's what I'm going to do. Next we have Seeker Purple. That's going to look really nice. Light blue to regular blue, which is usually a bit of a lavender color. It's rare to get completely blue flowers, even when the seed packet says it's blue. Hold that thought though, because I do have something growing in my ornamental beds that is absolutely perfect sky blue. I'm hoping it will flower this year. There is the first tray. Now, if you get your seedlings in the ground and they do nothing for a couple of weeks, there's a couple of reasons why that could happen. First is soil temperature too cold, your air temperature is still a little bit too cold, you maybe didn't harden them off properly. We'll talk about that in another video. That's a pretty simple process, but it does take a week or two. If your seedlings were very root bound and they ran out of space in their plug tray, then their growth would have slowed down significantly, and then it could take a while to get going again. That's another reason. And those are generally the common things that you want to look for. So we got a tray and a half of the status. That's pretty good in this short row. I'm going to put these back in the greenhouse and then we're going to move on to the next row. And that is where I had to stop work that day, unfortunately, but about a week later I managed to get the rest of the cutting garden completely planted. So here's an update of the stock interplanted with snapdragons. It's looking really, really nice. They're both getting fairly tall, and at the moment they're growing at the same rate, so I'm really hoping that that experiment is going to work out really well. The status settled in really well. I lost maybe 2 or 3 plants, looked like they were eaten by something, but the rest of them look great. The Rebecca is filling out really nicely. And then in the next row I ended up planting the rest of the status, and in the foreground here is all of the larkspur that I had left. So not sure how well that's going to work out, but we'll have to wait and see. And then we have Godetia or Clarkia. I had a little bit of that left that I put at the end of the row. The yarrow has really popped up. There's some flower stalks starting to appear, but I'm really eager to get this moved as soon as it's done flowering because the weeds are really starting to take over. The next row I ended up direct seeding full of cosmos, and they're starting to come up, and then the straw flowers ended up in the last row. So there is the cutting garden update, completely planted. We're still working on excavating a little bit for a patio behind there, but I think we've got our plans pretty well sorted. The raised beds look great, only 1 or 2 more need a bit of an overhaul, but that's basically the entire cutting garden done, and now we just have to keep the plants happy and watch them grow. Thank you so much for watching.